you've come to the session about data, okay? A lot of people are, look at data as being something to be afraid of and that type of thing. And it's really not. It's really not anything to be afraid of.
No,
As you can see, we're in a classroom. If you'll look right back here, we're in a classroom where they're taking data and they're graphing data. Their test scores, and of course they don't have, Brenda talked to you this morning about confidentiality. They don't have any student names on there, but they've got how the students are doing, and they can look really quickly at a graphical representation and tell how the students are doing. Are they making progress?
That's what we do.
So that's the biggest thing, is that you want to look at how can I easily take data while instruction's going on and while we're working with the students in the natural flow of the day, and how can we capture that data in a way that it's not going to be a heavy lift to get some information from it. So we're going to go through a presentation. So again, my name's Denny Palme, and like I said, we've got Brenda Combs back here with us. We both have been directors of special ed. We both have been teachers of special education. We've been coordinators. Brenda has a background in nursing. We've raised families. We've done a lot of things, but one of the most important things that we've done is work within the school system with special needs kids. And so we want to talk a little bit today about just seeing progress and how we capture that progress. So one of the things I want you to do right off is I want you to think about this gentleman that I have here on the screen. And up here it says, I was listening to a presentation by a person that uses this. This guy's Norman Vincent Peale, and he wrote a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. And so the guy that was talking about Norman Vincent Peale, he said he saw him one time do this experiment. He had a big old crowd, and he told the people to greet themselves, to greet one another. And he said, now, I want you all to stand up. So why don't you guys just stand up for a second? Just for a second. And I want you to greet one another as if you could care less if you met the other. Just
Hello.
Now, I want to change the dynamic here a little bit. Greet him as if he was your long-lost son.
Hey, how you been?
Great, how are you?
Did you feel the energy rise? What was the difference between the two?
You actually cared? Yes.
You actually cared, right? And it was something. Yeah. So you can have a seat. Norman Vincent Peale said, be your best. So I'm going to go to the monitor here and see if I can get this little video. It's about a 4-minute video about being your best, and we'll let it play. Now he is a tremendous writer.
Long ago, I made a speech to a company called the Ralston Purina Company in St. Louis.
He's also a preacher.
5,000 of their salesmen for a national sales convention of this great company. And this company was established by a man whom I knew at one time. His name was William H. Danforth. He was the founder, president, chairman of the board, and a great industrialist. He lived to be very old. When he was a young boy, he was very sickly. Later on, he wrote a book called I Dare You. It's a very small book. I read it once every year. I have read it ever since he gave it to me 40 years ago, which means I read it 40 times. This sickly boy in school told a teacher one time that life was too tough, that he understood that he wouldn't live very long. And the teacher said, remain after school. You've all been told to remain after school. And he was scared, and the teacher sat in the chair, and he said, now, Bill, stand up there in front of me. Draw yourself up to your full height. I know you think you are weak and skinny and sickly and you're going to die. But I want you to say after me, I am a child of God. God has given me a good body which I haven't developed. God has given me a good mind. God has put fresh air and pure water and wholesome food into the world for me. And I hereby dare you to become the healthiest boy in this school, the toughest physically. I dare you to live longer than any one of them. Now, a strange thing to say to a little boy. But years later, when he was about 84, I had lunch with him in the old Jefferson Hotel in St. Louis. There were half a dozen men. And I made the mistake of saying to him, Mr. Danford, how are you all this vigorous and vital at 84? He said to me, son, remember this was a long while ago. Would you like to be the same when you're 84? I said, yes, sir, I sure would. Well, he says, I dare you. And he took me out in the lobby. He took the other men out there. He said, the first thing you've got to learn is to have the proper form of exercise for your body. He said, you fellas take off your coats. We were in the middle of the lobby. And he said, we'll go through some exercises. I said, you don't mean right here, do you? Right here, he said, at no time like the present. And he had us lying on the floor with our feet in the air, doing all kinds of push-ups. And finally, when we were all struggling back into our coats, puffing, he wasn't puffing a puff. He said, return unto the Almighty and He will build you up. Meaning to cooperate with life. Don't fight it. Learn the rules. Here's the rule book. You practice all the rules and you're in forever. If you don't practice these rules, you're going to have hard going all the way. Life is adjusted according to proper scientific formula and procedure, and you live with it, and you come out okay, not without difficulty.
What do you think about that? What do you think? Why did I show that to you? Why did I show you? We're talking about data today, but why do you think I showed that to you?
Because he was able to put a powerful thought into his head to make himself strong and be able to live life.
mindset.
Yeah.
Power of positive thinking, right? Now, we work in classrooms all the time, right? And we work with children. And we tell those children lots of times things that we probably ought not tell them. Like, you can't. What I want to challenge you as you go back to your school district this year is to, when you look at that vessel, you look at that child, that you look at them as being able. And the power of positive thinking, and put that, and plant that seed. When you look at that vessel, if you're looking at a cup, the cup's almost full and brimming over. It's not. Half empty or less. Okay? Now, you can capture data all day long, and you can say what you want to say with data, but if you capture data with fidelity, and you look at how the student is doing relative to themselves, or if you look at how the student's doing relative to their peers, you can tell the story, right? You can tell the story if you know what data to take. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, but I wanted to start it out with each of these children that we're working with are precious, right? They're precious people. And if it was your own child, if it was your own cousin, if it was somebody that you're close to, how would you want that approach to be? And so we've got to, as instructional assistants, think about what can we do to see that student just as a student, and how can we see that student as a person that is valuable and that can do as opposed to can't do.
My favorite saying to a student, they hate it when I do it. They say, well, I can't. I was like, let me tell you something about can't. What happens when T runs off? What are you left with? They're like, can? I said, that's right. So T fell off and ran away and ain't coming back.
Exactly. And that's what we have to do, right? And can you imagine more for that child? Can you imagine better behavior? Because we're going to take data on how they do reading, how they do math, how they do writing, and how they do behavior, right? And how they do on goals if they have an IEP. So those are the types of data that we look at. But that data tells the story, really. And it tells us if the student's not making progress, what can we do different to come back and help that child in a different way? And so don't talk to them about what they can't do. When you go back to Morgan County, talk to them about what they can do. And Norman Vincent Peale, I had the pleasure of getting to hear him speak when I first started, way back in 1988 in Louisville. And he was doing the same thing. He was talking about how powerful it is when you think positive thoughts and when you see a child as someone that can as opposed to can't. And that's what that whole story was about. So I wanted to share that with you this morning. Now, or this afternoon now. I think it's morning. I've got a little quiz on here. So and the reason I'm doing a little quiz, I want you to just do a few of those, or do the whole list. Those are acronyms that we use in special education, okay? Now, if you want to use your device to Google, if you have a problem,
I want to see
whatever.
how many I know without it.
Okay, let's do that first, right?
Then we'll
Let's
get-
do that first. Let's see how many we can do without it, and let's see if it gives us some data. Okay, because there's a number on there. Anything we do with data, we're going to turn into a number, something we can count, we can measure, we can see, we can hear, we can time.
She's got one up on me though. She's got a little more experience in it. than I
Well,
do.
well, that's okay. That's all right. That's all
Have
right.
you heard some of these words on a daily basis?
So, and some of them are, some of them are a little harder than others. But just, hey, take a stab at it, right? See yourself as doing well with it. All right. Doing okay? Still going?
All right, I think that's, because these I've never heard.
You've never heard it. Okay. So
The SAS.
let's just pretend.
All right.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And I'm gonna put 13 up here. Now, pull your phones up, get your calculator. Okay?
Oh Lord, my phone's about dead.
It's all right. I've got one. You can use mine if it goes dead. And do the math problem. So you're going,
136.
huh?
0.13 is what mine was.
0.13.
Yeah.
And that's probably going to be what? We can convert that to really a 13%, right?
Yeah.
Which is okay, right? It's okay. You knew that, right? You knew that. And then 13 out of 22,
59.
59. So there you go. Now, if we do that right there, and then we scaffold it, we teach about it, we talk about it, and then we come back and take another data point, then that really actually gets progress monitoring going. You know what I'm saying? How you're doing on a particular task. Now, this type of data collection is really curriculum based. Okay, so those vocabulary words from the curriculum or from the lesson, that'd be curriculum based measures. So you'd have what we call, they call them CBMs, and that's in your packet. You can read about CBMs, but it really just turning that behavior. What did I ask you to do? I asked you to do a quick quiz, so I could see you do that quiz, and then I could actually grade that quiz after the fact if I needed to. So it could be a direct measure or indirect measure, but it's really a curriculum-based measure because those terms come from our curriculum. And so that's one of the ways that we take data. And what I wanted to say to you though is if we're doing this at the beginning, when we first start a new task, or if we're starting a new IEP, there's this thing called baseline. Okay, you've heard them talk about baseline. That's where we're currently functioning, right? That's where we're currently functioning. So I want to do this little exercise with you. So would we take just this 13%, or would we take several measures of that? Yeah, you're going to take. We'd probably take 3 or 4 measures, and then if we got, let's say we got a 13, and we got a 20, and we got a 22, and maybe a 29, and we would add all 4 of those together, and then we would take an average of that, and that would be our baseline then, right? So we could do that math. So let's just go through that list real quick. How many of you been to an IEP or heard of an IEP meeting?
I deal with them every day.
Okay, that's your first one. That's your ARC.
Yeah.
That's the team is your ARC, your Admissions and Release Committee. Okay, so you can write that down. Admission, you had it, didn't you? Good job. All right.
What is it?
Yeah, he got it. But now look, if we take that baseline and we come up with, let's just our arbitrary number, 13, 20. That's 33, 55, and then 84. If we divide 4 into 84, that comes to about 21%. So that would be our baseline, right? That would be our baseline for that. And we'd see where we're. Then we would do instruction. We do some new strategies. We teach vocabulary. We give examples and non-examples, and we give visuals, and we give all kinds of scaffolding. Or we'd let them use their phone to kind of overcome some barriers. If they can't read, we allow them to use a reader, right? Those types of things. So when we do that, we get that 21%, and then we teach and we teach and we do strategies and we do strategies and we take another data point, depending on whatever it says. And so then we would start to look at a visual representation. So we would start with the baseline would be 21%, but we're trying to get. A lot of people like to use 80, so we'll just use that. So we start taking, and we've got those 4 data points down here, and we got a broken line going up this representation, and then it just works all together, right? So now after we teach a while, we take another data point, right? And so the trick is to figure out, how do I do those data points and plot that stuff for my teacher that I'm working with? How do I help them? So if I know all that stuff, then I can do that, right? So we just saw how we would do a curriculum-based measure and how we would take data from just a simple quiz here that I gave you. You could use that as a bell ringer. Now, it doesn't have to have 22 items on it. It can have 5 items, and you can get a percentage just that way, right? And really, that's what curriculum-based measures should be. It should be just a snapshot of that child, and it should test the skill. What's the skill? Vocabulary. We want to know if you know the vocabulary, right? We want to know if you understand the vocabulary. Or it could be that we're reading words, or we're reading words under a time constraint. Like, here's a passage on a particular grade level. You read the passage. In 1 minute, how many words did you get correct? Right? That's data collection. You follow me? Now, let's just have a conversation. Your name is Griffith?
Yep.
What's your Roger? And you are?
Crystal.
Crystal. Okay, so Crystal and Roger. Why don't you tell him, have you been involved in data collection in your classrooms? So let's just have a conversation about that for a second. And if you don't care, speak up. So, because we're videoing, and I'd just like to hear what your experiences are, maybe what you have to tell him and share with me, and then we can fill in some gaps, maybe. Not to put you on the spot, just what have been your experiences with taking data? And does your district take a lot of data?
Oh, our district doesn't take a lot, or our school doesn't take a lot of data.
Uh-huh.
My experience has been is trying to figure out where to start.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, Shelley's been real good about telling me where to start at.
Uh-huh.
But we've gotten to know our system really well.
Mhm.
That all she has to do is fix me a folder.
Mhm.
And I do everything else. I do the progress monitoring, I collect the data.
Mhm.
The only thing is if you notice that they're going backward,
Okay.
that's when you need to speak up and say, hey,
You have to make a change, don't you?
yeah,
You have to make a change.
this was working and now it's not.
Right.
They have regressed. And you may have to start all over.
So would you say that's one of the main reasons you take data?
Yes.
Is it tracks the progress of the student. And if the methods and the teaching that we're using doesn't work, then we can use a football analogy. We've got to back up and punt. No, we got to change something.
Yeah.
We've got to back up and say, hey, wait a minute. We have to represent this. We have to try to work with this student in a different way. And so that's what progress monitoring really gets to. So let's look at this. So in telling your story there, and I really like the fact that you're telling your story because it gives us something to think about, right? And it also provides you with some experiences that maybe you hadn't heard about. So do you have any experiences with taking data?
I know that last year, because I started 3 months before the school year was over.
Okay.
And that was my first time ever getting into anything as far as it goes into the education. But we had one of our teachers fall behind, and luckily I had kept folders and data of one of the students of actually all his progress on his sight words.
Okay.
So I had to keep all their down.
So you
And-
have those experiences,
Yeah.
right? Now, do you realize that in order to be able to measure something, you have to be able to count it usually?
Yeah.
Or you have to be able to have a reflection on, like maybe a behavioral observation, you would have to reflect on that and see if there had been improvement. There's also collection around behavior.
Yeah.
And
See,
that's
we
a
don't
big
do
issue.
that.
So you don't do it?
No, we don't do the behavior part. We do.
Yeah. So you just do the academic part.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Well, that helps frame our conversation a little bit, and I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your time there on that. So, telling your story is very important, and I'll get my clicker and see if it'll work. So there's 3 types of data we just talked about, right? There's 3 types: academic, and then there's behavior, and then there's data around IEP goals that have, particular verbs that we can measure. We can see them, we can count them, we can hear them, we can time them. If that goal doesn't have something that we can count, or we can hear, or we can time, it's hard to measure it, right? It's hard to say that the child has made progress or not. So those are the 3 types of data that we look at. And then let me back up for a second, because I think there's a cool another little bit of video, and this is a little humor. Hopefully you'll find humor in it. I just wanted to, oops, let's go back.
That all day long. That'll make me mad. You come to my classroom acting a fool. That'll get you put out.
That'll get bad, they blame me. I am not the reason for battle down.
We need to call the data Bible, because somebody needs to whoop bad data. Bad data. I can't teach you using the data from last year. I can't teach you with last year's score residue. I'm cool with you using the data. Just don't use my data if I had low scores. Don't shine my low score data on the board for everybody to see as an example. That ain't everybody's business. That is the only thing keeping me from being great.
I don't see what they call it in-service when the material that they're using is outdated. The only time I'm in service is when I'm in church. If you want me to sit in service all day, you just start serving us a better breakfast. Ain't nothing continental about these bagels. Popped up with a fortune cookie the other day and it said great things are gonna happen to you this year. I saw them scores, I threw the cookie out the door.
They gonna tell me that the focus for this year is based on the data from last year. So you bringing up the past. We're going into the new year with old issues.
Is it sad for me to be praying for the last day of school before school even started, man?
So I really like that guy. And sometimes when you hear the word data or data, like he said it, sometimes when you hear it, it's like, oh my gosh, we have to take data. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So hopefully we've kind of already established, we've seen an example, and so it's not as imposing as it could be. It's just taking the time to do it and finding a quick and easy way to do it, right? And so when we're talking about taking data and doing progress monitoring and monitoring IEP goals, we're not talking about a long amount of time, because you might have 7 or 8 kids in the regular. If you're in a co-taught classroom, you might have 7 or 8 students that have IEP goals. And so you got to figure out, hey, I've got to be organized, got to have a folder on everybody. I've got to try to help support the instruction. Because remember, we want to see those students be successful. And we want to see those students as can do, not can't do, right? So that's so important as we move through and as we think about the data collection process. So every day when you do lessons, you're part of the lesson. Here's one of the things you can help students with. What is the lesson about? How does it impact me, or what do I know about it? If they don't know anything about it, or if they don't know the vocabulary, can we back up and help them learn the vocabulary? Can we check for understanding? Do we have a method for checking for understanding? Can we ask them some questions about it and take data, right? Or take data, bad data, right? And do we know where we're going to go next? If the kid's not getting it, what do we have to do? We have to give them another practice, don't we? We have to give them another turn. We have to get some feedback. And so we have to really think about what is the relevance, what's going on with the lesson, and is it every day? Can we check for understanding? Can we make sure the kid's getting it? And part of making sure the kid's getting it is we're going to take a little measure. We're going to take a little measure so we have to know what those measures are, right? So I'm going to talk to you about curriculum-based measures. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about behavior measures as well, okay? Because it just kind of comes with the territory, okay? So, all right, so let's see what we got next. So what is data in special education? Recording behavior, recording performance or progress on skills or tasks that the students are doing, either with an IEP or with a behavioral intervention plan. Now, sometimes you'll have a student acting up, and one of the things we want to do is we want to take that behavior away and give it a replacement behavior, right? Because when you take the behavior away and you don't replace it with something positive, they'll replace it with something. You can take it away, you can remove them from the situation, but if you don't teach them to replace that behavior with something positive, they'll fill it with something, and it might not be positive, right?
Yes.
So, you got an example?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had one 2 years ago. He was a very bad behavior kid. Anytime that he was asked to do work, he would beat his head against the wall, he would scream, he would throw things at us.
Right.
And no matter what we tried, unless he got what he wanted, he was a handful. And
Did you try to teach him some new behaviors?
Yes, we did.
To
But when you've got one that will do anything to keep peace with this one, it's hard.
It is. And so when you see, all right, if you say, okay, how much is he beating his head? How much is he hitting someone? That's frequency data, right? So you would capture that data. You'd look at it. Hey, maybe when is it happening? What's he getting out of that data? Is he getting attention? Is he avoiding something? Those are the types of questions that we have to ask ourselves. So in order to really change that behavior, we need to know how frequently it's happening and how intentional he is and what's he getting out of it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here. And then that includes behaviors, academics, and functional skills. Data collection is the foundation of the IEP. So if you're working in special education, we have to be in tune with what's in on the IEP, right? We have to monitor those goals, and we have to try to teach students different strategies in order to make progress. And so you have to, are you making progress on, you could be teaching a student, you said you worked in FMD. One of the things that you might have to teach a student is toileting. You might have to teach them how to make themselves a sandwich. So one of the things you'd have to do is, in order to be able to capture data on that, you would have to be able to, we call it operational definitions. In special education, we call it, what's the steps to making a sandwich? And we teach the steps. And then we have the student make the sandwich. And we watch the student make the sandwich. And we see what steps he's missing. And we try to teach those steps. And we try to teach that sequence. But in order for students with disabilities to get it, we have to do it often. And then we have to see. And so we have to know what the target is. What are we trying to measure? What is it we're trying to change? What is it we're trying to look at to see if they're making progress on? So we have to define those targets and really work toward.
What about one that's nonverbal? What can you do?
Nonverbal. Well, with nonverbal students, lots of times the first thing you've got to establish is communication. How do I communicate with that student? Can I communicate with that student so that we know that they're getting some input from the curriculum? They're having access to the curriculum. Are they able to participate in the activities? So we got to come up with some type of communication device. There's tons of. Brenda's getting ready to do the next session in here is going to be on assistive technology. And so, do we have a communication board? Do we have an iPad, something that we're working with? And then we work with that student to build that vocabulary, to build that communication, so that he can have access or she can have access to the curriculum. Now, secondarily, or maybe even more primarily, can that student keep themselves safe? Can they tell us when they're hurting? Can they tell us when they need something? So we would work toward building those functional pieces in. And that would be a big part of what we would do in terms of working with that student. We'd say, we've got to teach them to tell us when their stomach hurts. We've got to teach them to tell us when they're hungry. Tell us what they want. So we have to come with representations and a way around that student not speaking, but communicating through a device or communicating through a board. And we would have to work and work and work. And that is the most basic form of education. Okay? The other thing is, can we teach that student to communicate so that they can have friendships, so that they can have meaningful relationships? Can they open up at home and talk to their parents? Can they talk to their friends? Can they talk to us? And can we give them a greater quality in their life by doing that? And so that's so important that we realize that we open that board up, we find a way through whatever assistive technology that student needs to allow them to answer yes and no. You might start with that. Can you answer yes or no? Do you understand what this is? And you start with that, building that vocabulary so that you can communicate to keep them safe, so that they can have meaningful relationships, and so we can teach them through the access to the community, to the curriculum.
So that would be the main focus.
That would be the focus. That's the starting point, and that should be the focal point of the IEP. So.
See, I thought that they had his goal set to work to start with.
And sometimes maybe they don't understand that when we're looking at that student, that we're just not sitting, they're not just sitting there to the side and maybe doing a worksheet or whatever, but we're really unlocking their ability to communicate with us. And that is the most basic form of education that we can provide in public schools. And so that's so very important. And I'm glad you asked that question, because that really is meaningful, right? And so, one, can they communicate their wants and needs? Can they keep themselves safe? Two, can they communicate with us so that they can get some enjoyment out of life? Can they have meaningful relationships? And three, can we communicate so that we can teach them more things about function, and more things about taking care of themselves, and more things about reading and writing and math?
Because we have him two boards. He has one that is, that you can push.
Sure.
And then we have one that he can peel off.
Yeah.
And he does better with the peel off.
And as much as you can get trials with that, as many times as the more you can increase that back and forth with them. Somebody should be constantly working with that student back and forth. You say something, he says something. Now, he may not physically say it, but he communicates it with pointing, or he communicates it with eye gaze. So we got to figure out where his baseline is.
Yeah.
Where is he currently functioning? That's what baseline is. So we did a little exercise with you to kind of demonstrate your baseline is. I knew three of these terms I need to build, but in order to build that, we got to know where your starting point is, so we know what to focus on, right? So that's huge in terms of And Brenda, did you have anything at all to add to that? Because, as far as communication is concerned in FMD classrooms, that is the curriculum.
That's vital. We want our students to graduate from high school with some type of communication device because there's not going to be somebody standing there to help them communicate later on. So our job is to, at an early age, if they're nonverbal, to start using some type of device till we find out what device works best. And when we find that device, that's the one that we use. And we can carry that out, and the child will take that to his adult life and use that.
So we're building that independence. You know what I'm saying? We're trying to build away from dependence. And if you just think about it, if you make progress in those areas, what a home run you're going to hit with those parents. If they can tell when I'm hungry, when I'm sick, when I'm sleepy, when I'm tired, when I'm hurting, when I'm sad, when I'm lonely. Those are all things to get to understand. And that's where we got to start. Can I communicate? So important. Can I communicate and keep myself safe? Can I communicate to get what I want or to have my needs fulfilled? If I'm hungry, can you imagine? Can you imagine if it was one of our own children and they couldn't tell us? So we got to work to get them to tell us. We can't just let them sit there, right? We can't just let them sit there and hope something's going to happen miraculously. Now, we all know that science does tremendous things. So what we have to do is what we can do right now, and so that's huge. So baseline data, progress monitoring, and consistent system of data collection is huge. And what it does is when we take that data, it tells us what we got to do next. It helps us with our instructional decisions. It tells us where to go. You said it. I didn't have to tell you. You do it in practical terms every day. You said if the kid's not getting it, we got to back up. And sometimes the goal's too hard. And if the goal's too hard, we got to adjust the goal. We got to give more support. We got to find scaffolds. What scaffold did I use with you guys? I said, all right, let's try it first without a scaffold. And then we can go to the what? We can go to the device, right? That's a scaffold, right? So we build in those things to teach, and we get kids interested that way. And so it really, the reason we take data and the reason it's so important is it tells us, are they making progress? And it tells us where to go next with their teaching. So important. Next slide. Perfect segue into that. Why do we do it? Why do we do it? And I could have asked you that question, right? But we'll go ahead and talk about it. According to the guidance document, our IEP guidance document, we have an IEP guidance document on the KVE's website that talks about how to write an IEP. But at the end of that IEP guidance document, it tells us after we implement that IEP, how are we to monitor progress? How can we see if the kid's getting it? How can we say that we've done something with that kid? We haven't just babysat. And that's what it says. It says it informs instructional decisions. It helps us track student progress. It identifies needed interventions. It can tell us where to go next or where to look next. And then it supports the IEP. Okay? The implementation of the IEP. And it really is the only thing that we have to prove that we did anything with that kid. So if we do get into a situation where a parent's upset or somebody takes us to court or does whatever, God forbid that would ever happen, right? But if that happens, that we could show, hey, here's what we did with this student. Here's why. Here's how we made adjustments. Here's how we changed. Too often, we come up with a plan, we put it in place, we go with it, and whatever the kid gets, we make very little adjustment. And it really happens with behavior. Okay? We send them to the office, we suspend them, and it doesn't change the behavior. When they come back, they're probably worse than when they left, right?
Because they're not getting
We're not teaching them.
the discipline, not really discipline, but the reinforcements that they need.
Yes, exactly. Great word. Great word, because reinforcement is a big part of this. So, the types of data we collect, we got behavior data sheets we collect, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but it's a good review. Academic data, things we're taking from the curriculum, Behavioral data, things like how many times a kid hit, what function is, what's a kid getting out of the behavior, what's happening before the behavior and during the behavior. Those types of things are key to note, right? And so what data measures, what general data measures do we do? Identify the skill or behavior you want to track. Once you have the right data sheet, or once you have the right sheet, data collection is a process of identifying the skill or behavior, providing the needed materials for the data trial to happen, and recording the outcomes with attention to prompts and cues, and then understanding the conditions for data collection. So here, let's see what this one says. You've listened to me talk long enough, now I want somebody else to talk.
Sometimes the data don't matter.
I use data all day long. Data make me mad. You come to my classroom acting a fool. Data get you put out.
Data get bad, they blame me. I am not the reason for bad data.
We need to call the data mama, because somebody need to whoop your bang.
That's what he says, right?
Bang down. I can't
Bad
teach you the
data.
data from that.
That's what teachers say about it, right? But it has a tremendous, tremendous impact on student learning and student progress if we're doing the right things. So here was a little sheet that I came up with. So when we're looking, what are our steps for data collection? First, we have to know what the skill is and what it is that we're trying to measure. Okay? So like I said, I used the example of a peanut butter sandwich. Or I might use the example of, if you work in FMD, a lot of FMD teachers have been taught to operationally define the process for using the restroom. Okay, they'll have the signs up, right, and they'll have the steps, and so you have to teach those steps, right? You have to teach. This is what you do, and then if you do this, then you do this next, and then you do this next, and you do this next, right? And we're not going to go into the particulars, but you see what I'm saying? You have to know what the target is in order to be able to say, did the student make progress or not? If we're not on the same page on that, we're hurting ourselves. And then we select the method within which we're going to. So we determine the types of data you need to answer your question. What's the question we're trying to answer? Can they make a sandwich? Can they use the bathroom correctly? Right? Those are the things that we're talking about. And those are that's lots of functional stuff. And it could be, how many words are they getting correct when they read a 1-minute passage on a particular level? How many sentences can they write in 1 minute if you give them 3 words?